He had the money, he had the status, he had the seat. But what Marcus Johnson didn't have, at least in the eyes of the flight crew, was the look of someone who belonged in 1A. "I'm sorry, sir," the attendant said, her tone dripping with fake professionalism. "That item isn't available." Minutes later, she served the same exact dish to the white woman seated beside him. No apology, no explanation. What she didn't know was this: the man she'd just brushed off with a lie didn't just buy a first-class ticket. He owned part of the airline, and by the time this plane landed, her career and the culture that protected it would never take off again. Because Marcus didn't shout, he documented, he escalated, and at 37,000 feet, he lit a match that would set the whole system on fire. If you believe respect should come before prejudice, drop a respect first in the comments and hit subscribe now. You won't believe what happens next, because today's story isn't just a story about a meal. It's about what happens when power gets tired of being polite. Hi everyone, welcome to BW Stories. Let's get started. The champagne flutes clinked before takeoff. A soft jazz track swirled through the first-class cabin of Sky Elite Airways like an expensive secret. Everything gleamed, brushed brass trim, imported leather seats, personalized monograms stitched into pillows. It didn't look like a plane. It looked like the waiting room for heaven. Marcus Johnson fastened his seatbelt with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. He adjusted the cuff of his slate gray travel suit, nodded politely at the attendant, who offered him a hot towel, and declined the pre-flight mimosa with a calm smile. He was tired. Not in the jet lag sense. Marcus had long since made peace with fatigue as a permanent passenger. No, this was the quiet, marrow-deep tiredness of someone who constantly lived in rooms he wasn't expected to be in. Even now, first-class seat 1A, with a net worth north of $300 million and rising, he felt the familiar flick of glances. Not hostility, just doubt. That little pause in the server's step, that flicker of, "Are you in the right place?" before the smile caught up. Marcus didn't need a magazine profile to tell him he'd made it. He'd built Technova from scratch, turned a two-person software firm into a global AI infrastructure giant, advised federal policy panels, and owned enough equity in Sky Elite Airways to sit on its board if he wanted. But here in this immaculate, climate-controlled cabin, he was just another passenger with dark skin and no visible label to announce his status. And in America, that was never neutral. He exhaled quietly and opened the menu. Filet mignon with saffron glaze, Chilean sea bass with white truffle foam, roasted duck à l'orange sous vide to a whisper. He tapped the option labeled Gourmet Delight, a signature meal. Sky Elite mentioned in its marketing, Kobe beef, black garlic juice, and heirloom carrots flown in from France. A dish so indulgent it bordered on parody. The attendant returned her blonde bun tight enough to suggest policy. She didn't write down his order. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said, the syllables wrapped in faux sweetness. "That item isn't available, though. That is a flight." Marcus blinked once. "You're out of the Gourmet Delight?" Her smile remained. "Yes, it's a limited supply. I can recommend the chicken roulade. It's quite nice." He nodded politely. The kind of nod that said, "We both know this isn't about poultry." He glanced sideways, seat 1B, occupied by a white woman in her early 30s, Louis Vuitton, tote effortless confidence. She leaned forward to the same attendant, who greeted her like an old sorority sister. "Oh yes, I'll have the Gourmet Delight," she said brightly. The attendant nodded without missing a beat. "Ms. Callahan." Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't lean in. He didn't say a word. He watched as the attendant strolled away, heels clicking softly, and returned minutes later with a pristine tray. He could smell the garlic before it hit her table. A slow burn started in his chest. Not rage, not even indignation. Just that old familiar ache, the one you learned to swallow so often you stopped tasting it. He pressed the call button. Gently, a second attendant came, this time male, dark-haired, mid-40s, clearly more senior. "Yes, sir," he said, polite. "Professional, neutral." Marcus pointed calmly to the menu. "I'd like to understand something. I was told this dish was unavailable, but the passenger next to me received it moments later." The man's expression didn't crack. "That alone was impressive," he said carefully. "Perhaps it was a miscommunication. Sometimes meals are pre-assigned to select passengers, based on loyalty status or dietary need. I'm a Sky Elite signature shareholder." Marcus said, "I also pre-selected my meal during check-in." A pause. "We'll look into it," the attendant said, already turning. No need, Marcus said quietly. I believe I understand. He folded the menu shut. The woman next to him glanced over. She'd caught the exchange, but didn't speak. Just smiled awkwardly the way people do when they realize they're complicit in something but don't know how to say it out loud. Marcus pulled out his tablet and connected to the in-flight Wi-Fi. He opened his notes app, titled a new entry, Flight 2201, Discrete Bias, and then he began typing. Refused signature, entree without explanation. The attendant delivered the same dish to the white passenger in the next seat. Response to inquiry, vague deflective. Previous instances. Check past Sky Elite reports. He didn't need a scandal. He didn't want a confrontation, but his silence was not surrender. It was the strategy. Because Marcus Johnson hadn't just bought a ticket, he'd bought stock. He'd invested capital. He'd built empires, launched IPOs, and restructured Fortune 100 boards from behind velvet curtains. He knew what power sounded like. And it wasn't raised voices or slammed trays. It was a quiet note typed at 37,000 feet, with fingers that knew exactly which strings to pull. A few rows back, someone laughed too loudly. The scent of truffle oil drifted past him. He sipped still water, looked straight ahead. This wasn't about the steak. It never was. This was about who gets to be served without apology, and he was done pretending not to notice. The chicken roulade arrived 15 minutes later. Overcooked dry, plated with care, but a standby dish, a culinary afterthought, dressed up to look intentional. Marcus didn't touch it. He didn't complain either. That was the trap. Once you complain, you're labeled complex, sensitive, entitled, and the worst of all, angry black man in first class, the kind who makes everything about race. He'd seen it unfold 100 times, and hell lived it in boardrooms wrapped in glass and billion-dollar endowments. But this wasn't a boardroom. This flying hierarchy was polished at 37,000 feet and designed to look neutral and act anything but. He glanced across the aisle. Another attendant crouched beside a white couple, laughing softly as she poured their champagne. The couple wore matching Rolexes. They looked like regulars. No one poured anything for him. Marcus's jaw flexed. Then, without realizing, his mind slipped backward into the well of memories he'd paved over long ago. That was the thing about subtle slights. They echoed. Not just in the moment, but through every other time it happened, and every time you swallowed it just to survive. He was 10 the first time he flew. It was a short flight, Atlanta to Memphis, back when flying felt like a miracle. His mother had packed sandwiches just in case the food on the plane wasn't safe. They were in the back row. He'd pressed his nose to the window the entire time. A white woman across the aisle had dropped her purse. His mother picked it up, smiled, and handed it over. The woman flinched, didn't take the bag, just looked straight past her like she didn't exist. Marcus had asked what was wrong. His mother had said nothing for 3 seconds too long. Nothing, baby. Some people just don't know how to say thank you. He never forgot the look on her face, that quiet defeat disguised as grace. It took him years to name it: dignity, held hostage. He looked down now at the untouched plate in front of him. Same dish, different table. The screen before his seat showed flight progress, New York to London, halfway across the Atlantic, a journey he'd taken more than 20 times. Always first class, always in a seat that looked impressive, but it never made him feel welcome. He flipped open his notebook app again. 3 attendants have served row 1. None have acknowledged me since the initial refusal. Ms. Callahan 1B has now received a second glass of champagne. I have not been offered beverage service since boarding. Check my Sky Elite status. Top tier highest spend category. Incident reflects pattern, not anomaly. He paused, then typed one final line. Silent exclusion is still exclusion. As if on cue, the first attendant, the one with the bun and the sugar-coated voice returned. She stopped at his row and offered a tight-lipped smile. I just wanted to let you know. She said that we had a miscount on meals. The gourmet delight was pre-allocated. It's not about anything else. Marcus tilted his head. Not about what? She blinked, realized she'd overstepped. Just not personal. He nodded slowly. That's the line, right? Not personal, just policy. She stiffened, then gave a thin smile and turned away. It was personal. That was the truth. She couldn't say out loud. The truth most institutions were built to deny. When you're black and successful, everything is labeled coincidence. Every slight is a misunderstanding. Every denial is wrapped in professionalism. Marcus closed his eyes. He remembered the venture capital pitch in Palo Alto 15 years ago, when he walked in wearing his best suit and the partner asked if he was there to fix the Wi-Fi. He remembered the doorman in his building who asked him 3 years after moving in if he was making a delivery. He remembered the private equity event in Geneva where the server skipped his table twice, assuming he didn't belong. Same pattern, different altitude. He opened his email, searched Lisa Chen, the contact. Contact popped up instantly. CEO of Sky Elite Technova's longtime aviation partner. They'd co-invested in a carbon-neutral fleet project, shared panels, and even had dinner at the White House Correspondents' Gala. Marcus didn't like pulling rank. But this wasn't about rank. This was about calling a thing what at one. He started typing, not from emotion, from precision. Subject incident aboard flight 2201. Lisa, hope you're well. I'm currently en route to London on SC flight 2201. There's a situation with the first-class cabin crew that requires immediate attention. I've encountered what appears to be discriminatory service, specific details outlined in the attached notes. I'm not looking for compensation. I'm looking for accountability. He attached the note, hit send, and sat back. For a moment, he just breathed. Then a voice from beside him. You handled that well, Sarah Callahan said quietly. Marcus turned. She looked uncomfortable but sincere. I saw what happened. The way they spoke to you, the food thing, all of it. He studied her. You didn't say anything. He said not accusing, just factual. I didn't know if it would help. She admitted I didn't want to make it worse. Marcus nodded once. That's how they win. She blinked. When everyone decides silence is safer, he added. Sarah hesitated. Can I do anything now? He gave her a long look, then handed her his phone. Record the rest, he said. Everything from here on out. This isn't over yet. She took the phone, understood. He smiled faintly. Let's see if they still think it's not personal. The cabin lights dim, not for ambiance, but to signal compliance. The kind of soft hush that says, be still, let it go, accept the silence. But Marcus had never been the type to flinch in the dark. His phone buzzed. Lisa Chen. He stood up, unbuckled his seatbelt, and walked calmly to the galley near the front of the cabin. The crew glanced over nervously. He said nothing, just turned his back to them, leaned slightly against the partition and answered, Lisa. Marcus. Tell me this isn't what I think it is. It is. A pause. Then the sound of movement papers being shuffled, a door closing, a side too tight to be casual. Give it to me straight, she said. So he did, in clipped professional detail. The denied meal, the visible double standard, the repeated lack of service, the glances, the tone, and the underlying current of something colder than indifference. Lisa listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said only, we're fixing this now. I'm not asking for PR, Marcus replied. I'm not even angry, I'm tired. I've invested in your company. I know what your brand says it stands for. But what happened tonight, that is who you are. That hit hard. Lisa exhaled. You're right, you deserve better, not because of your stake, not because of your name, because you're human. Our staff should act like it. I don't need apologies, I need precedent. Understood. Another pause. This one felt surgical. How long until landing? 5 hours. Give me 30 minutes. You'll have an update. The line clicked. Marcus turned around. 2 crew members quickly averted their eyes. He didn't say a word, just walked back to his seat and sat down. Sarah looked up. Everything okay? We'll see. Lisa didn't waste time. She slammed her office door shut in Manhattan, barked at her assistant to hold all calls, and looped in Sky Elite's COO, head of HR, and general counsel on a secure video line. We have a situation, and it's not just a PR issue. Marcus Johnson is on flight 2201. He owns 9% of our company and just got profiled by an entire cabin crew. The HR exec went pale. The GC stopped typing. The COO leaned in. Walk us through it, she did bluntly, with no room for misinterpretation. He was denied service, watched white passengers receive what he was told didn't exist, documented every second, and there are at least 2 independent witnesses. What's he asking for? Asked the HR head. He's not, that's the problem. He doesn't want a refund. He wants accountability. He wants us to take our values seriously. The legal officer nodded grimly. That means we act before this becomes viral. Too late, Lisa said, holding up her phone. Hashtag first class. Discrimination is already trending. A blogger on the flight is streaming the service differences in real time. We have maybe 15 minutes before this hits network media. What's our move? Asked the COO. Lisa didn't hesitate. Pull the flight log. Cross-reference names. This crew has had complaints before. I want the files. If there's a pattern, we end this right now. The HR exec frowned. Immediate termination in flight. They humiliated a major stakeholder in public. On video, the question isn't whether we terminate, Lisa snapped, whether we let them walk out or have them escorted. A beat silence. Then the legal officer said, we can reassign a new crew to Heathrow ground staff will handle the transition. We'll brief Marcus and issue the necessary clearances. Lisa nodded once. Do it. 35 minutes later, Marcus's phone buzzed again. He picked up. We're taking action, Lisa said. The crew has prior flags. This was the last straw. When you land, they won't be returning with the aircraft. A new crew is being flown in. Marcus didn't speak immediately. They'll be informed after landing, Lisa continued. We're coordinating with Heathrow security to remove them discreetly, but visibly. He finally said, you sure that's the right move? I am, not because of the optics, because of the principle. Lisa paused. Yes, because of the principle. Marcus nodded slowly. Thank you. Marcus. Yes. I hope you never have to make this kind of call again. So do I. He ended the call. The hum of the plane felt different now. Not louder, just clearer, like the sky itself had shifted. Sarah leaned over. That was the CEO, wasn't it? Marcus looked at her. It was. She blinked. Are they doing something? They are. Sarah sat back, eyes wide. 10 minutes ago, you were just another black guy getting treated like trash. Now you're the guy who called the damn CEO. Marcus shook his head. No, I was always that guy. They just didn't care to look. And for the first time since boarding, he took a deep breath. He didn't feel powerful. He felt seen. The flight never felt more crowded. Not in the physical sense. The leather recliners still offered 6 feet of personal space. Champagne still shimmered in tall crystal flutes. But in the air between people, it was thick, uncomfortable. As if the fuselage had sealed in more than just oxygen, it had trapped resentment, shame, and a slow-building storm. Marcus didn't look up when the pilot came over the PA system. The words were clipped neutral. Ladies and gentlemen, we've received word of a corporate incident involving in-flight service. We have been instructed to reroute back to JFK. We apologize for the inconvenience. A beat, then murmurs, confused whispers. Heads turning as Sarah in 3A reached for her phone wide-eyed. She knew the guy across from her, knew the people behind her knew. The black man in 2D wasn't just some first-class passenger. He was the reason the flight was turning around. What the hell does this mean? The voice belonged to Gerald, a hedge fund manager in 4C, who hadn't so much as blinked at the earlier confrontation. Now he was upright, voice high-pitched, livid. We're turning back because someone didn't get their duck confit. A few people chuckled nervously. Someone clapped one of the flight attendants. The younger one, who had refused Marcus's order, with tight-lipped politeness, visibly flinched. Marcus finally looked up. You think this is about food? He said, his voice quiet but lethal. That shut Gerald up for a beat. Then what is it about? Marcus looked around the cabin. Every set of eyes is on him now. It's about rot, invisible until it hits bone. You just saw it bubble to the surface. He sat back again, eyes forward, it as if he hadn't just issued a verdict. The purge. 10 minutes later, the captain came out of the cockpit. That never happened mid-flight unless something had gone wrong. Behind him, a flight marshal emerged. Then another man in a charcoal suit with a Silver Sky Elite lapel pin operations director, not scheduled to be on the flight. He had boarded discreetly back at JFK when Marcus did. He didn't introduce himself, just walked past. Marcus stopped at the galley and summoned the entire crew to the front. They huddled, faces pale, backs turned to the rest of the cabin. From 2D, Marcus could hear words like protocol violation, public relations disaster, and executive mandate. Then came the shock. The suited man raised his voice, not in anger but in clarity. All cabin crew assigned to flight SC-2201 are hereby relieved of duty, effective immediately. You will disembark upon landing in New York. Gasps. Real gasps, the kind you don't hear in corporate settings. The head purser, a woman in her late 50s with perfect posture and a name tag that read Linda turned ghost white, Excuse me, she stammered. We followed policy. The man in the suit didn't blink. Then the policy was broken long before today. One of the junior crew members began to cry. Another looked at Marcus like he was holding a smoking gun. He didn't flinch. Public re-entry. By the time the jet rolled back into the gate at JFK, it was a media circus. Word had gotten out. Live tweets, reels, hashtags trending, like wildfire, or first class, discrimination, Marcus fired them, our skylight scandal. The airline had issued a vague statement, something about ongoing review and commitment to inclusivity. It didn't matter. The internet had already decided. And this wasn't the internet of the last decade. This was the algorithmic crucible that burned ambiguity to ash. Airport security flanked the jet bridge, not to arrest, but to protect. Marcus exited without a word. Flashes lit up his face like strobe lights. Cameras caught the glint in his eyes, the slow exhale through his nose, the way he carried the moment like a quiet weapon. Behind him, the crew filed out under escort, heads down, eyes hidden behind sunglasses. For once, uniforms offered no power. Aftershock at Sky Elite's HQ in Midtown Manhattan. Lisa Chen was already on her third morning press call. We are conducting a full internal audit, she repeated. Yes, the entire crew, effective immediately. She paused, listened. No, we don't comment on shareholder identity. However, Mr. Johnson is a valued partner and board member. His concerns are being taken with the utmost seriousness. She hung up, rubbed her temples, and looked at the empty espresso cup on her desk. Then she smiled, not out of amusement but understanding. He warned me, she murmured, and he had. Marcus had told her once over scotch at a rooftop gala that when racism showed up politely, you had to drag it screaming into the light. Institutions only evolved under pressure. Today he applied pressure, and the system cracked like a cheap wine glass under a steel boot. The story wasn't over, but the reckoning had begun. The terminal windows at JFK hadn't seen this much press since the last political scandal broke loose. Flashbulbs scattered like lightning across the glass, and security cordons held back a writhing crowd of reporters, live streamers, and amateur truth hunters, all shouting one question. Is it true the CEO fired the entire crew midair? Inside in the VIP arrivals lounge, Marcus Johnson sat alone. He looked neither triumphant nor furious. He looked like a man carrying a weight he hadn't expected. Not the public spotlight, not the social media chaos, but the stare of a nation that had decided he was either its new symbol or its newest villain. He sipped tea slowly, his fingers still stiff with the adrenaline of confrontation. The Sky Elite Crisis Response Team had descended like locusts, PR heads with two white smiles. Legal reps are pushing confidentiality waivers. Board members are trying not to sweat through their $7,000 suits. But Marcus wasn't playing to their clock. Sir CNN has reached out for an exclusive The Times too, a young assistant said, barely hiding her panic. Tell them I'm not a hashtag, Marcus said flatly. She blinked. Excuse me. I'm not a symbol. I'm not a trending moment. I'm a man who got humiliated in a first-class cabin of a company I partially own. Tell them that. Meanwhile, Lisa Chen was deep in damage control. She stood in the operations wing with Sky Elite's executive team flanked by HR legal and crisis communications. Her voice was low and deadly precise. This didn't start today. This started the first time a complaint about that crew got dismissed. We didn't train them to be racist, but we sure as hell trained them to feel untouchable. Some crew are threatening legal action. Someone offered meekly. Let them, Lisa said. Let them explain on a record why a black CEO in first class didn't get served while everyone else did. Let's put that on court transcripts. Out in the public arena, the social storm was rising. Skylight, shame, Marcus Matters, first class, while Black Sarah's video, complete with timestamps, crew names, and when Marcus was told he must have misunderstood the menu, had racked up 8 million views in 12 hours. Airline union scrambled. Staff forums leaked chat logs where cabin crew had joked about entitled flyers and diversity hires who think they own the skies. By noon, Marcus's inbox overflowed. Messages from strangers, from senators, from celebrities, from airline competitors, from black pilots, whispering their own stories, and from the crew themselves. Not apologies, defensiveness, denials. One email said, I thought he was pretending to be someone important. Marcus read them, all of them. Then he opened a message from his father. Just 4 words, she would be proud. The next morning, Lisa called an emergency press conference. No spinning, no scripted regret. We failed, she said bluntly. Our staff failed a passenger, our systems failed accountability, and we are now facing the consequences of both. Beside her stood Marcus, not in a suit but in jeans and a dark sweater, clean and clear-eyed. You don't need a PR team to explain dignity, he said into the microphone. You need a memory, a sense of what it feels like to be treated as less than. He detailed the incident, then the emails, then the transcripts of previous unaddressed complaints, and then quietly he said, this isn't about me. This is about a system that teaches certain people that they get to question your worth without consequence. I'm not the first, I won't be the last, but I will be the loudest. It wasn't a speech, it was a line in the sand, and it hit like a body blow. Investors called emergency meetings. Sky Elite's stock dipped 11% before stabilizing. News outlets swarmed airports asking passengers if they'd ever experienced discrimination in the sky. A black family canceled their vacation, saying they didn't want the hassle. A former flight attendant posted anonymously revealing that passenger profiles were an unofficial joke during training sessions. And on the 3rd day, Marcus was called to testify before a congressional subcommittee. He went, this isn't about customer service, he told the panel. It's about culture. When you bring your biases on board, the air is no safer than the ground. It was all supposed to calm down, but it didn't, because every person who had ever been told to change seats to calm down to explain their presence in a premium space saw themselves in Marcus, and he refused to be quiet. Sky Elite's board issued a rare public letter. We support Mr. Johnson. We will act. But action, Marcus knew, wasn't a memo. It was policy structure, consequences. And so Marcus met with Lisa again, this time behind closed doors. I want a full audit, he said. Every route, every crew, bias, reporting systems, complaint, tracking, hiring patterns. That'll take months. Then start yesterday. She didn't argue. Marcus leaned forward. You want to rebuild. We don't start with apologies. We start with accountability. Lisa nodded, and then she handed him a file. Inside records of past customer complaints against that crew, most closed without follow-up. You were right, she said. It wasn't new. It was tolerated. Marcus didn't smile. Not anymore. He stood ready to leave. Marcus, Lisa said, voice low. Are you going to stay on the board? He paused at the door. I'm not just staying, I'm rewriting the playbook. By the end of the week, Sky Elite wasn't the only airline under fire. Other black professionals started sharing their own flight stories. A tech executive told of being mistaken for staff. A lawyer recalled being asked 3 times to confirm her seat. And through it all, Marcus stayed public. Not for ego, but for fuel. Every story, every retweet, every long-forgotten indignity is being dragged into daylight. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like relief. He hadn't burned a crew. He'd lit a signal fire, and people were finally looking up. 6 days had passed, 6 days since the wheels touched down, since the cabin crew filed off in stunned silence, since the story detonated across networks' timelines and inboxes like a payload no PR team could contain. The media called it a flashpoint. The airline called it unfortunate. Marcus Johnson called it what it was, a mirror. And the industry had to look at itself for the first time in a long time. He wasn't surprised by the fury. What shocked him was how fast the veneer cracked. Behind the luxury lounges and marble counters, a rot had festered, quiet, protected, and systemic. Marcus stood now in a conference room far from first class. No champagne flutes, no silk-stitched pillows, just fluorescent lights and hard truths. Across from him sat Lisa Chen, CEO of Sky Elite Airways, flanked by their new Director of Equity Integration, Olivia Mensah, a Ghanaian-born strategist whose eyes scanned with surgical intent. The boardroom was still raw, not from the scandal itself, but from what it had dragged into daylight. We pulled 5 years of customer complaints, Olivia said. Her voice was low, but it sliced through the room. Over 40% involved perceived bias in first-class or business-class service. Only 8% were formally investigated. None resulted in staff-level consequences. Lisa exhaled. Because we never had a protocol. You had choices, Marcus countered. You just didn't make them until now. The silence that followed wasn't defensive. It was acknowledgement. Lisa's expression wasn't corporate. It was personal. She'd built Sky Elite from an underdog carrier to a global luxury name. But now in every terminal, people looked at her brand and didn't see Polish. They saw a slur delivered with a smile. Marcus leaned forward. Tell me about Flight 411. Lisa hesitated, then nodded toward Olivia. Olivia opened a folder and pulled out transcripts 3 months ago. An indigenous woman was removed from the first-class lounge in Montreal. She was accused of loitering despite having a valid first-class ticket. Staff noted she was wearing a hoodie and didn't make eye contact. Marcus tilted his head. So casual attire and cultural norms became probable cause. Yes. What happened to the staff? Lisa looked down. Nothing, Olivia said. HR closed the complaint, labeled it a misunderstanding. Marcus said nothing. He didn't need to. Lisa finally broke the silence. We've fired crews before, for theft, for safety violations, but not once for racial bias. That changes now, he watched her. This isn't about firing people. It's about rewiring the machine that made them think it was okay. Lisa nodded. So help me do it. That night, Marcus wrote the memo himself. Not his assistant, not legal. Him. It was sent to every department head at Sky Elite. Subject, the ground rules are changing. He listed the real numbers, complaint to resolution ratios, bias cases, buried in HR metrics, showing the exact tipping points where customer value shifted by skin tone, accent, or outfit. He added this. Discrimination isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like policy. Sometimes it looks like discretion. But its effects are measurable, and moving forward, they will be measured. Within 72 hours, the fallout began. Several executives quietly stepped down. A whistleblower hotline flooded. 5 customer-facing managers were reassigned pending retraining. A regional VP submitted a letter of resignation, but Marcus refused. You don't get to run, he told her on the phone. You get to stay and fix what you ignored. The board bristled. Investors grumbled. But the public roared. Passengers across the country began sharing their own stories. Hashtags formed a second wave. Sky bias, #luxury. For some, equity, at 37K feet. Olivia launched phase 2, mandatory equity drills, recertification for first-class attendants, and a monthly rotating panel of real customers from marginalized communities to audit the service. But it wasn't about punishment, it was about fluency, about making equity a language, not a lesson. Lisa attended every session. So did Marcus. In one training, a young white flight attendant asked, "What if we're trying our best, but we get it wrong anyway?" Marcus didn't scold her. He just said, trying isn't the finish line, it's the starting gate. By month's end, something shifted. Complaints didn't disappear. But for the first time, they were met with real answers. Resolutions, revisions, accountability that had teeth. A rival airline tried to spin the narrative, called it optics theater. But that backfired. Their stats leaked. They scrambled to implement their reforms. In the shadows of turbulence, Sky Elite started to climb again. Not because they salvaged their image, but because someone finally stood up midair and said, no more. 6 months had passed since the flight. Marcus Johnson stood under the sterile lights of a conference room tucked inside Sky Elite Airways headquarters. It was smaller than he expected. Not the sweeping boardroom where decisions were usually made, but a quieter room away from the gloss and spin of PR campaigns. This one had no skyline view. Just a round table, a coffee pot that hadn't been touched, and 5 chairs occupied by people who hadn't slept well since April. Across from him sat 3 members of the former cabin crew. No uniforms, no name tags, just people. Tired, pale twitching, fingers on cheap plastic water bottles. Marcus folded his hands. He didn't speak first. Lisa Chen sat beside him, her expression unreadable, flanked by a neutral party from HR. Not a mediator, not today. Today was not about arbitration. It was about something heavier, messier humanity. The silence cracked when Maria Gonzalez, the flight attendant who had first denied Marcus the meal, spoke up. Her voice was smaller than he remembered. I want to say I didn't see you. Not really, I saw a problem. Or what I was trained to think was a problem. Marcus didn't flinch. And what did you think I was? Maria looked down. Someone who didn't belong. There it was. No excuses, no legalese, just raw admission. That day, said another crew member, Jared, who had backed Maria up. We followed procedure. That's what we told ourselves. But our procedure was broken. We didn't question it. We just ran the playbook. Marcus leaned back slightly, letting the truth settle. A playbook that treats calm, affluent, black passengers as statistical threats. Jared nodded. He didn't defend it. Lisa spoke next. We dug into the internal complaint logs. You weren't the first. There were other flags, warnings, emails that never escalated. So why now? Marcus asked. Because you had the power to make it visible, because you didn't let it slide. He exhaled slowly. And you think this meeting makes it right? Maria shook her head. It doesn't. But I've had to explain why I lost my job to my kids. I've had to tell them I was part of something wrong. I don't want pity. I want accountability. But also, I want to understand. Plus him. Marcus looked at her. Looked not through the lens of grievance, but of cost. Understand what? How you didn't explode, she said. How you kept your voice level when the world would have understood if you hadn't. That caught him, the weight of restraint, the centuries of learned quiet. The cost of dignity is maintained at a high altitude. He stared at the table, then spoke. Because I couldn't afford to. Not as a man, not as a CEO, not as a black man sitting in first class where I still don't look like I'm supposed to be. Because the moment I raise my voice, I become your justification, not your exception. Silence again. But it wasn't empty. It pulsed with recognition. He turned to Lisa. This is not closure, it's not forgiveness, but it's necessary. She nodded. We've offered support for career transition counseling. Some have accepted, some haven't. But we're also rewriting what it means to train a team. This won't happen again. Not like that, Marcus stood. Peace doesn't come from apologies, it comes from not repeating the wound. He offered a brief nod to the crew. You lost your uniforms. I lost a piece of belief I didn't even know I was still holding on to. Maybe one day we both earn something back. He left the room. Outside, the city hadn't changed. Flights still lifted off every hour. Executives still closed deals in the sky. But for once, someone had landed exactly where they needed to, not in vengeance, but in truth. And that Marcus thought was the beginning of something real. Not peace, but something close enough to fight for. The house sat quiet on the edge of Laurel Hill, its wraparound porch caught in the breath of early spring. It was unremarkable to most eyes, weathered siding, a faded mailbox, the kind of home you drive past without remembering. But Marcus Johnson remembered. This was the house his grandfather had been denied. Not for lack of funds, not for lack of credit, but because the bank officer in 1971 had looked at his grandfather's calloused hands, his brown skin, and said the market was shifting away from families like his. Whatever that meant, Marcus had never gotten a clear answer, just a pile of dusty paperwork, rejection letters, and his grandmother's worn sigh whenever the subject came up. Today, Marcus stood on the porch with the keys in hand. Not metaphorical keys, not symbolic ownership. Real keys to a deed in his name, paid in full. He opened the door quietly, stepping into the calm stillness. Inside, the air smelled like drywall and fresh paint. But beneath it, if he breathed deeply enough, he could feel memories settling into the beams. Echoes of what could have been. Echoes of what would now finally be. On the mantel above the fireplace, he placed a framed photo, a still from the reformed Sky Elite flight team lined up in crisp uniforms, diverse, dignified. Above them hung the new company charter. Service Equity Accountability. He added a second frame, a copy of the op-ed from The Atlantic titled Altitude and Accountability, What Happens When Black Power Doesn't Flinch. In it, they had chronicled the entire journey. Not just the incident, everyone knew about that by now, but the weeks after the union protests, the congressional hearings, the retraining protocol dubbed the Johnson Framework is now used by 4 major airlines. The legacy he hadn't intended to build but had been forced to. And below it all, a quote from Marcus. I didn't want to make history, I wanted a damn meal. But if a sandwich becomes the hill you must die on to prove your humanity past the mustard. He smiled faintly at that line. It had made people laugh when he said it live. But it had been true. He hadn't gone to war for glory. He had been tired, hungry, and humiliated. And when power tried to ignore him, he didn't shout. He wrote a new manual. The office he'd renovated sat waiting in the back of the house, shelves lined with books on aviation ethics, labor policy, and black business history. His company, Technova, had created a scholarship in his grandfather's name for aspiring pilots of color. The first recipient had written him a thank you letter that Marcus kept by the window. Legacy isn't just what you build, he had come to understand. It's what you refuse to let rot. Outside, a jet buzzed overhead, invisible in the cloud line. Marcus stepped out onto the porch, the weight in his chest finally settling. He thought of the headlines, hashtags, hate mail, and gratitude messages. He thought of the moment they served him. That meal 10 minutes too late, 10 decibels too loud. He thought of the flight attendant who had tried to apologize months later, eyes wide with fear and regret. He hadn't said much. Just this. We remember the wound, but we also remember who didn't look away. Back inside, he hung one last thing by the door. The Sky Elite boarding pass from that day, crumpled, slightly torn, a relic. Not a ticket to travel. A receipt for change. Thank you for staying until the end. If Marcus Johnson's story struck something in you, anger, discomfort, or maybe a truth you've been ignoring, that's not by accident. Racism isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers through a denied request, but its impact is systemic and crushing. And systems only change when someone stands up and says, enough. If you believe every human deserves dignity without needing a suit or status to earn basic respect, share this video. Let this story reach someone who needs to hear it. Speak up when you see injustice, whether on a plane, in a boardroom, or across your dinner table. Because real change doesn't start in corporate press releases. It starts when you hit share, leave a comment, or say, no, this isn't right. Thank you for watching. See you in the following story.
I love this story. Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more information. Don't forget to check out the video currently on your screen. You won't want to miss it. See you in the next one.